Hey, and we're back. Thanks so much. I know we're just keeping you on the edge of your seat. So you don't know, like, is it up yet? Are we doing okay? So hopefully now we're out of the woods in terms of tech issues. So I get to introduce to you our next guest, Don Smith. Thank you for joining us today, Don. Don leads the CTU Cyber Intelligence Cell at Secureworks, and you basically lead a global team of highly experienced threat analysts. And you do a bunch of fascinating work that gives you the big picture view of what's happening in the threat space and how we can best respond to that. So we're excited to hear all about that. Don, you can go right ahead.
All right. So thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I'm talking to you from Scotland. We, I think, share a patron saint with Romania, St. Andrews. So anyway, let's get into the presentation. A couple of years ago, I saw this tweet. I like to think that INFOSEC has a lot of turbulence for very little current. Stay away a week and it feels like you've completely lost touch. Stay away the year and it's all the same. And actually, I feel that way a lot. To go away for a couple of days, it's like, what's happened? It's all different. Go away for a year and you're like, oh, hang on a minute. Why aren't people still using multi-factor auth? So it's always a bit of a challenge understanding what's happening with the threat, what's important, what's not. And Secureworks, I think hopefully many of you have been familiar with Secureworks. We've got a big presence in Romania in terms of numbers. We do 1,400 incident response engagements a year. We have 4,500 clients where we manage the security across their networks. We capture, as an example, 90 million artifacts from our botnet emulation and tracking platforms every year. We process 3 trillion security events a week on behalf of our clients. And we have a wayback system where we can search, which is 9 petabytes. So in Secureworks, we see a lot, we've got a lot of stuff, but we've got to make sense of it all. How do we go about doing that? Well, there's a variety of things, and one of the first things is to just classify what a threat actually is. What are we trying to prevent and understand? Threat is a combination of 3 things. Intent, the desire to do something. Capability, the means with which you can do it. And also opportunity, the fact that you have an opportunity presents itself to conduct your objectives. And we see a bunch of different threats, stealing money, stealing ideas, stealing data, temporary disruption, or perhaps somewhat more permanent disruption. In this day and age, of course, the main focus for many of us, possibly should be all of us, is sophisticated criminal enterprises, because these guys have focused very hard in the last decade or more on maximizing the revenue that they can make from a single network intrusion. And what do I mean by that? Well, if we go back 15 years ago, I remember actually being in a pub in London with, of all people, using Kaspersky, and he was saying, yep, the bad guys have discovered they can make money out of malware, and that's what's going to happen. So we saw the rise of the banking Trojans. But the impact really was to the employee whose computer got infected, or to an individual. It wasn't to an enterprise. We then saw the rise of cryptographic ransomware, but it was single host ransomware, again, with a very limited impact and a relatively limited amount of money to the bad guy. There was then various different things, cryptojacking, crypto mining. These are still pretty much omnipresent, but of course we are all now very familiar with post-intrusion ransomware, where the bad guy emulates a sophisticated adversary, well, is a sophisticated adversary, gets onto the network, works their way around, and tries to encrypt all the computers in an enterprise in one go. Then the bad guys realized that, hey, not everyone's paying, because some of them have got good backups. What can we do to try and persuade people to pay? Okay, well, let's steal data first, and then we can hold them to ransom for name and shame for showing this stuff out. So the way I look at this is that you have got businesses that are thinking, how can I make more dollars from a compromised computer? And when you think about it that way, you see it's perfectly natural. The common view of a criminal being, a young kid in a hoodie in a darkened room is not the case here. These are sophisticated criminal actors, and we need to be equally sophisticated to defend from them. So this stuff is bad. Things go dark when you get hit by a post-intrusion ransomware attack. You may not even have any voice over IP. Your phone comms may be down if you're using, some sort of Cisco-style voice over IP service. You may not be able to find your incident response plan. These are not fun incidents. And sadly, in Secureworks, we see a lot of them. So this year alone, so far, year to date, our incident response teams have responded to 61 post-intrusion ransomware incidents where the organization concerned was, very badly impacted by this stuff. In fact, in the last 4 years, we've responded to over 256 of these, which gives us an insight into how these bad guys work. I guess if there's good news, and I'm not entirely sure it's good news, if you look at these overlapping charts here, you can see the dates, and you can see that this year we're pretty much tracking last year in terms of number of engagements at this point in time. So that's good because it's not more than last year, but it's bad because last year was already bad. And in the word chart, the word cloud on the right, you can see the ransomware actors that we have responded to in these 61 engagements, and the size of the font is directly proportional to the number of times we've seen them. So we've responded to Revel and Hades more than we have, Lockbit, but Conti, DarkSide, and Bash Serena equally well. So we've seen quite a lot of this badness that's going on. What conclusions can we draw from that? Well, the criminals are after money. They are going to, like criminals do, follow the path of least resistance, and they're predominantly opportunistic. We use active verbs like targeting in the security industry all the time, but these bad guys are really making the best of the opportunities presented to them. The only thing I'll draw your attention to here, this is the location of victims for our incident response team, is the lack of victims in Eastern Europe, in Russia. Now we don't sell in there, but I think across the board, you'll start to see a pattern that Russia isn't very targeted by post-intrusion ransomware. And in terms of verticals, we have a situation where our data suggests that manufacturing is actively targeted, if you look at this bar chart here. But I don't believe it is. This is a classic correlation versus causation thing, where if you're in a manufacturing company and you stopped making things because of one of these attacks, you are much more likely to seek external help to get back operating because you've stopped making money. You're also much more likely to want to do a root cause analysis and make sure you understand how it happened. So there's selection bias in people who are prepared to pay, the high prices for professional incident response services, which gives us that this, I think, overestimate of the targeting of manufacturing. There's another thing at play here, of course, which is that some other verticals are much more subject to compliance regimes, which gives them more investment in security. And there is really an absence of very large banks being hit by post-intrusion ransomware, and that's not a coincidence. So what I'm really trying to say here is that these are actors of opportunity. They're vultures, they're not hawks. How are they organized? Okay, well, we've got the guys that write the malware, and they handle the back-end stuff. We've got the affiliates who are actually conducting the lateral expansion, the action and objective, and doing the actual ransomware. And we've got the initial access brokers, the people who are actually breaking in and then passing that on to the affiliates. So it's a little matrix, little sophisticated criminal enterprise. What's interesting, though, is when you look at the adverts for affiliates, and this advert is from the tail end of 2020, it predates Colonial Pipeline and some of that other ripples in the pond. At that time, the actors advertising for affiliates, their adverts were a little bit, thirsty. I don't know if that translates, but they were very keen on hiring affiliates. They were very keen in terms of competition, in terms of the money they would give back, which really just, there's a wee thing about Russia here coming, but we can ignore that. It really allows you to join the opinion that the thing that's stopping more of these things happening is not that networks are well defended, sadly. It's the lack of humans able to type on the keyboards in the adversary organizations. And that's quite a sobering thought for anyone who's involved in cybersecurity and network defense, because that kind of enthusiasm, competition, marketing they were doing to try and hire affiliates really gave me the impression that was where the constraint was in their business model. Now, of course, since Colonial Pipeline, we've had a little bit of shuffling around, but the shuffling around really is just rebranding. So these are bits of threat intelligence product from Secureworks, where basically we've got 3 groups who have decided to go away and come back again as something different. And of course, they are doing that because what's bad for business? What's bad for business is the US government describe you as a sanctioned organization, and it's illegal to pay you money, that's a bad day for a ransomware actor, a business who wants dollars. So they had to go away and rebrand. They also did take a slightly extended summer vacation, but anyway, that tends to happen. You know, they're all in Sochi or wherever they are. Many of these groups operate name and shame schemes, and obviously nobody wants to have their stuff published to the internet like this. This one was interesting. You can see the reverse RHB there. You can stick that into Google, and it is indeed January in Russian. So the bad guy here, whoever opened this Excel spreadsheet and took the screenshot, had a computer that was localized in Russian language. Yeah, no surprise there. And there's no sign of this slowing down. In fact, many people, ourselves included, scraped the name and shame websites to see what's happening. Took this screenshot a week or so ago. Slightly felt bad about this because if you look at the victim in the middle, it's Charlie Hebdo, and nobody on earth should be attacking Charlie Hebdo, but that's a different story. It's just a constant stream of victims. How do they attack? 3 main ways to get in. Amazing for me, RDP is actually, on our statistics this year, the most common initial infection vector. I don't know why people still expose RDP to the internet in this day and age, and I don't know why they do it with static credentials, but they really should learn to not do that. Commodity malware, we've got the trick bots, the quack bots, and the EmmaTechs, which I'll come to shortly, that people are using as loaders. And then finally, of course, scan and exploit. And that's increasingly been the case actually in the last couple of months, where vulnerable, actually security infrastructure that's internet facing has been exploited by bad guys. I think it's Lockbit, but don't quote me on that. We're having a little bit of that happening about 4 weeks ago. And as I said, EmmaTech is back. EmmaTech came back about a week ago. It's pretty much the same as before. Some of the crypto has changed, and there's a couple of new tagged epochs. So despite a very effective takedown operation, I think led by the German and the Dutch police, EmmaTech have finally decided to resurrect the botnet there. Interestingly, after that takedown, which was obviously aided by the fact that some top-tier infrastructure was within reach of European law enforcement, the top-tier Quackbot C2 servers all moved to being in Moscow, so they're not in reach, which is a bit painful. Through various different means of monitoring, we also have been able to identify for a period of time this year all of the Quackbot victims, and you can see they're basically in Europe, the sort of more monetized parts of Asia and North America, if you add up all the numbers. And very few of them actually in Russia. That might be the ones that are. I think there's only 18. Maybe they're test instances, who knows. The ransomware playbook, I think everyone knows how this works. You gain access, you consolidate it, you get privileges, you do your data exfiltration, you do discovery in the network, you work out how you're going to deploy your stuff. You pick your moment, you do some negotiation. It may be multi-phase, it may involve name and shame. And then finally, you either get payout or you abandon it. And obviously the challenge for people like me, understanding the threat landscape, is to document that, because nobody wants to detect ransomware. You have to detect ransomware precursors, because if you've detected the ransomware, it's too late. So we build lots of little graphs like this, which is a bit of a jumble, and then we can lay them out like that, according to our friend Attack, and we can start to look for precursors and patterns in precursors. So when we see these patterns of behavior, we can say, aha, we stopped some really bad stuff here. So that's a nice thing to do. So you get ransomware, and it's all terrible, and everything in Don's presentation is saying it's super bad, super hard, and all the rest of that. Well, this is a gestation of a particular incident. Last year, I've changed a lot of the details here, but they've got RDP open to internet, single-factor auth with a VPN, Mimikatz is used to dump credentials, there's PowerShell, there's Cobalt Strike, there's all the usual suspects. So, the advice here is really clear and easy. Don't leave RDP exposed to the internet. Please use multi-factor auth. Make sure you can see host enumeration and password dumping tools being used. Be able to execute PowerShell, detect Cobalt Strike. Everyone's using Cobalt Strike, and it's later on in the deck as well. And what controls do you have around privileged users? So despite all of the sort of doom and gloom, the detection window, it is small, but it is real. You can detect the precursors and you can stop this stuff from happening. In fact, this is a terrible average. because averages are only good when you have nicely distributed data. And in this case, I know the data, and the data is not nicely distributed. We've got some very, very long dwell times in our data set, and we've got some extremely short ones. So the mode is probably 5 to 7 days. The mean is 21 because of some extra long dwell times. But across those 61 post-intrusion ransomware engagements this year that we have worked, our IR team has worked, the mean dwell time is 21 days. There's time to stop this. Then we've got still cleverness. So ransomware groups dropping Tor and using that as a back connect module. You can see the Tor configuration here pointing at 3389, which is terminal services. So you're using Tor to come into your server, then bouncing onto 3389 on the loop back. Very clever. And of course, they're obviously using common tools for the data exfil, whether it's the Megasync stuff or rclone. And just to reinforce it, the adversary only wins when he gets money, and we think we've lost when we've got Quackbot on our network. And between those two events, there is that mean dwell time of 20 days where you can stop the bad event. You can stop them from winning. You haven't lost yet. Of course, in the summer, just on the Friday before July the 4th, Independence Day, we had the Kaseya attacks. Interestingly, the script that dropped the Revil malware checked the date and time and then slept so that the Revil malware was going to be executed at precisely the same time everywhere it was dropped. And we did a reasonable number of engagements here. And in this case, the actor clearly made no effort to go beyond the servers that had the Kaseya software on it. And you have to ask yourself, what was the intent here? Was the intent making money? Or was the intent something a lot more subtle, which was actually to pass a message to the United States on the Friday before their Independence Day public holiday? Now, of course, we've got some really clever criminal actors based in Russia. Here's one example, Maxim Yakubets. He's been indicted multiple times over a decade, and these are just some examples from a separate deck on the indictments against Yakubets and his criminal fraternity and their handles and all the rest of that. In fact, you may have to do some clever VPN stuff, but the BBC published this on iPlayer at the weekend, which is Joe Tidy, who's well-known correspondent for the BBC around cybersecurity, who traveled to Moscow to try and meet Maxim Yakubets. He ended up meeting his father, but it's only 23 minutes long. It's just worth a wee watch if you can get access to it. Anyway, the bottom line is the bad guys are out of reach for traditional law enforcement. The problem's not going to go away anytime soon. Hostile state actors. Okay, so there's a bunch of flags here. There's the 4 common ones, and there's 2 slightly less common ones. So we've got the Vietnamese and the Indians in here, as well as China, North Korea, Russia, and Iran. And why are these 6 flags up? Because in the last 12 months, we have responded to incidents involving actors from these six countries. Sunburst, SolarWinds, I think everyone's familiar with the story here, but the thing I'd like to tease out here about the Sunburst and SolarWinds story is the fact that they had the malicious DLL on potentially around 18,000 hosts. Depending on who you believe, there's between 60 and 250 organizations actually impacted. And I believe the figure is closer to the lower end there than the upper bound. So you had somewhere less than 1%, 1/3% of victims had follow-on activity. The passive DNS gives the same ratio. I'll come to that in the next slide. So there was a lot of fuss and there's a lot of learning to be made out of SolarWinds, but I think a lot of organizations struggle to understand that the Russian SVR are not interested in them, and they've rapidly triaged them out. In fact, this is a graph of passive DNS data internally. And if you're not familiar with SolarWinds, you can find many places publicly talking about this thing on the right, which is when the initial DNS request went to the AVSVM cloud domain, the IP address given as a response was telling the malware what to do. It was saying, okay, go away and don't ever contact me again. It was saying, wait, you might be interesting, or whatever. And using these responses, which of course are captured in passive DNS results, you can then create a picture that says, okay, of all the people who had this DLL, what was the ratio of responses? And you get exactly the same kind of ratio of responses that I mentioned earlier. Still learning. Supply chain is an effective route of compromise, software update services, build systems, that was a kind of cool bit. Service providers used as a way in, cloud is still ill understood and technically opaque, and the realization that we live in a world of extended enterprises. And these are all valid learning points, but flow, turbulence, these are all old learning points. Target breach with supply chain in 2013. We've got the Iron Liberty discoveries that Secureworks made in 2014, where companies have been compromised and their software downloads were being tainted. Build systems, I hadn't seen that before, but it had been a scenario in a training I'd conducted. Service providers, well, just look at Cloud Hopper. People have been abusing tokens not sessions, for a long time. And of course, the analysts have been saying no organization is independent. So yes, learning, but if you were a CISO and you're thinking that SolarWinds is giving you a whole lot of new problems, I don't think you'd really done your research to understand the problems you were facing. Interesting to highlight the monoculture of Office 365. I'm not saying that's bad, but it certainly, in fact, in some ways it may have helped here because Microsoft worked extremely hard and diligently to help this. But imagine here, you've got a situation where the SolarWinds server may have had privileged credentials. The bad guys go in there, they steal the credentials, and they gain access to Office 365, and they're never in the on-premises environment of an enterprise at all. And yeah, so these are some old presentations of mine. This was from 2013, saying, hey, tokens not sessions, worry about this stuff. And we published some stuff saying the Russians were using OAuth back in 2017, so this is not new. Similarly, where are your keys? So these are instructions from Microsoft about how to export the private key to assigning SAML assertions, which of course is the identity glue that people use for SaaS providers. Exporting that private key, I've maybe been around too long, but that's pretty scary for me. And you can see this bulleted list of things that Microsoft have recommended to secure ADFS servers. You just have to skim through this and ask yourself, my goodness, there's something that they really want to protect that's in there. And of course, it's the private key. Back in the day when I was first working with sort of PKIs, we had to use these evil, scary HSM things to store private keys so that they couldn't be stolen. And I'm not suggesting that everybody has to do that, but it is horrible thinking that someone will steal a private key and then off you go. Okay, right, today, different story. Is Thanksgiving in the United States. So they'll all be getting their turkeys in the oven. I don't think they'll be eating them quite yet. And what happened on Thanksgiving 1 year ago? What happened on Thanksgiving 1 year ago is a web shell got dropped on one of our customers. And we detected it, which is great. And the bad guys just went straight on and started to dump the entire contents of Active Directory. This does sort of relate to Sunburst, but not quite. In FireEye's original blog post, they mentioned a web shell called Supernova, and that's from their Git repository. Microsoft came out shortly afterwards and said, yeah, so we looked at all this Sunburst stuff. And in the very end of that long blog post, they said there was the discovery of additional malware that also affected SolarWinds Orion, but has been determined to be likely unrelated to this compromise and used by a different threat actor. And indeed it was Chinese. And one of the reasons we could say that was because the customer of ours that was impacted on Thanksgiving last year had a previous APT intrusion a few months earlier. And the hands-on keyboard activity we saw mapped precisely, so we could tell it was the same actor because the same traits, what they were typing, what they were doing, variable names they were using, temporary files, all the rest, that kind of good stuff. But in the previous intrusion, they had picked up a copy of Redcloak, our endpoint agent, and they had deployed it, we believe, in their own data center to take a look at it. So here, what you can see is a check-in from an IP address 117.21.187.144, which is one of our endpoint agents checking in, which was with the license key of our customer, the victim. And it was here in China, which is not where our customer was. So we did put this in our public blog post when we spoke about this Supernova activity. And really the only person who picked up on the coolness of this was MalwareTech. So he said, so the Russia hacked SolarWinds and backdoored Orion. Meanwhile, the Chinese were using a vulnerability in Orion to drop web shells onto people's networks. I like the part where the attackers stole the victim's EDR tool, that's our Redcloak, and ran it on their own infrastructure, resulting in Secureworks being able to identify them. Well, we liked that too, I have to say. And then it got published and all the rest of that kind of good stuff. One threat actor, 2 intrusions, 2 vulnerabilities. So fun, patch or be punished, please. NSA are saying patch your stuff. We had a half name attacks. We did 39 incident response engagements against Exchange servers. Our observations here were quite interesting. 47 of 47 either clients or incident response engagements. 8 we saw generic command execution, ping or whatever. And in 4 we saw genuine real world action, hands on keyboard. Now you could argue that in the numbers on the left, the delta is because we stopped it, which is very true. But it was just quite interesting that there was only 4 where actions had occurred. So again, like SolarWinds, we've got triaging occurring after an intrusion has occurred, rather than triaging occurring before. And what was interesting about these 4 is that all of those 4 had previous experience of Chinese APT actors. So you've got this funny thing going on with the proxy logon stuff, where you have a remote code execution for Exchange, yet you blast it around the internet and you drop China Chopper, which anyone can detect. Something odd went on here, and of course the odd thing was that the guys in Taiwan had shared the exploit with Microsoft, and Microsoft had it bundled up in a Patch Tuesday release. And the actual exploit that was used apparently was very, very similar, or if not identical, to the proof of concept code that was distributed to MAP partners on February the 23rd. So you've got this kind of situation where they knew the door was closing. They knew this remote exploit of Exchange was going away in a few days' time, and they just went for it and created a huge amount of noise. And who knows how they got it? It's unlikely. Maybe DevCore Werpop, the original exploit author, maybe the Taiwanese networks. I don't know. Maybe Microsoft. I doubt it. But there's a lot of MAP partners, so that's an awful lot. And maybe one of them has popped, and they're located all over the world as well. So just a very interesting experience there. So. Also, fun things dropped from web shells recently. So using DNS Tunneling for command and control, 2 different variants, same actor, where in the first one, they're looking for text records, so you can get a multi-line record back, and then they can decode the commands from the DNS. And in the second one, it's A records, so they've got to do a little loop to recover multiple A records, concatenate that, and create their commands. So lots of fun stuff there in terms of DNS tunneling. And obviously with DNS tunneling, please do not ignore detections, because the destination IP is 8.8.8.8. It doesn't always make it good, because the bad stuff flows through DNS. But anyway, let's not go through there. And that, of course, that was dropping Cobalt Strike, and everyone's using Cobalt Strike. So if you're a hostile state actor, you really don't want to be discovered and have the attack attributed to your home nation, so you're going to use commodity tools. I'm going to finish just now with 2 very quick stories. They're slightly older stories. Hopefully not many of you have heard them before, but I think they're fun, and they also help us think a little bit more broadly about the threats we face. The first one is a fake NGO, a fake non-governmental organization. So Qatar were awarded the Footballing World Cup, soccer for anyone who's American listening. Clearly an obvious choice for the Football World Cup. It's not warm there at all, and they're a famous footballing nation, aren't they? So no controversy there. They then start to build all of these stadiums, and I actually visited the people responsible. I was in Qatar meeting with the folks there, and they said, look, we're using the World Cup as a catalyst to become the next Dubai. It gives us the investment, makes us a holiday destination. So they're spending all this money in the World Cup projects, construction projects, with a lot of immigrant labor. And then the Washington Post puts out this article saying, really, they're not taking good care of these construction workers. And Qatar is outraged. And around the same time, this NGO appears called Voiceless Victims. And ostensibly, they were caring about children all over the world. But if you looked really into their Twitter and all the rest of that, you could see that they had a strong focus on things going on in Qatar. So it's a bit odd. And they they also had this thing going on where they were supposed to be based in Paris, Spain, and London. Yet, if you did a pattern of life analysis on their Twitter, they weren't working on a Friday and Saturday, which doesn't feel like a Western European working week. That feels like a Middle Eastern working week to me. And then if you look at the time of day they're working, it also felt very Middle Eastern too. They also hid where they were coming from when they were sending lures to one of our customers. So you kind of like, are these people who they claim to be? And we worked with Tom Brewster at Forbes on this, and some others. This was the guy overall in charge of Voiceless Victims. His name was Luke Hahn. He had 0 connections on LinkedIn, yet he'd been working for 15 years. That's got to be some kind of record. And he has a law degree from Oxford. Yet when he was challenged by Tom Brewster the day before his article was published, he replied with this. And I'll read the second sentence of the second paragraph to you. We sincerely hope that your information isn't coming from the same ones who are trying to bring us down and prevent the truth about foreign workers' situation in Qatar to be told. Now, I just about ran out of oxygen saying that. Now, I don't have particularly good English, being Scottish, of course, but seriously, if you have a law degree from Oxford, you're going to know you need to put a comma in that sentence. That is not a sentence written by someone who has a law degree from Oxford. Anyway, we published this, or Tom published this, and on that day, their website went from this to this. Fake NGO, gone. Fake people. This is the curious case of Miash. Miash was a catfish run by the Iranians. Cobalt Gypsy, Iranian group, desperately trying to get into one of our customers in Saudi Arabia, trying to drop puppy rat. We stopped that campaign. And then a few weeks later, we were asked to analyze some malware from the same customer that had come in through a different route. We analyzed it and it was puppy rat. And how did it get there? It got there because a lady based in London called Mia Ash, apparently a photographer, had reached out to a systems administrator at our customer and had tried to build up a relationship with him. And he had initially rebutted this and said, I'm not interested, go away, whatever. But eventually, he started to chat to her and all the rest of this. Many communications. They apparently both liked traveling. And then finally, she sends him an Excel spreadsheet on Gmail and says, this is a questionnaire about places that you'd like to go and see, but it'll be better if you open it on your work computer. And of course, he does, and it drops puppy rat, at which point the message is, Dear Mia, due to your file, I'm in trouble now because this file has a virus issue. So he was properly catfished. There's another victim here, and I know I'm talking to a predominantly Romanian audience. I would urge everyone to not try and pursue this lady. This was a Romanian photographer. She's expressed no desire to get involved in this. This is a relatively old story. Don't try and work out who she is. It's got nothing to do with her. They just stole her photos, and they used those photos. And we published this, got quite a lot of press everywhere. A week after we went public, another victim reached back out to Alison, the researcher that had uncovered all of this, saying that he had been involved. And we then learned a lot more about the tactics of the Iranians posing as this fake Miash persona. And they had been communicating for hundreds of days. He had registered domains. He'd given her in inverted commas, remote access to his computer. And he worked for a very, very large consulting organization at the time. He said to Alison when she was interviewing him, many times I doubted her intentions, but I never once doubted that this was a real person. And he thought he was talking to a photographer in London, and he was actually talking to a hostile state actor based in Iran. So pure catfish. And these two stories just give an example as to how far organizations will take it if they really want something from you. My last slide. I was in Iceland. I was talking to the police in Iceland, and the policeman there said to me, I will show you a lure relating to a romance scam, and you will not believe that somebody fell for this and lost tens of thousands of dollars. So I don't know if you can see my mouse, but can anybody spot anything slightly dodgy or slightly wrong with this lure? Somebody received this with a swastika on it and still sent money over. And as the head of the cyber team at the Icelandic police said to me at the time, if you get something like that and you don't stop, how entangled have you become in the great lie? And that's everything for me.
Thank you so much, Don. You're perfectly on time. And this has been just incredibly comprehensive. I mean, you've managed to capture so much information and top it all off with some like just extremely relevant and perhaps I think new to many examples that show that help us kind of plug that big picture into some very real case scenarios and learn how to better identify the situations, but also how to better communicate them, because there is so much research, I believe, in cybersecurity right now, and so many people really struggling their best to get the information out there and get it out there fast so that it may reach whoever needs to, that I think that many, people working in security or in IT can use these stories and examples and share them with decision makers so that it may help them, translate things better into their terms. So this has been just absolutely mind-blowing. I wanted to ask, when you deal with, and I think that this is a relevant thing for almost everyone working in cybersecurity, when you deal with so many, there's always a fire burning somewhere, multiple fires at once, most times, and there's a lot of negativity. How do you deal with all of that, but still protect your mental health? How do you still remain positive and constructive when you see all of this damage happening all the time, every day in and day out?
Yeah, it is difficult, but the thing which I kind of skimmed over. In presentations, you always talk about the incidents that have occurred that have had the most drama. But the number of times that we've stopped STB bot because we've got good countermeasures for it, and we know that therefore CLOP wasn't deployed. There are all sorts of success stories. They're not as emotive as the big incidents, but the success stories are there. The frustration is, and going back to the very first slide, the solutions here are not to focus on shiny, blinky things with a blue LED. It's asset management, it's patch management, it's building your defensive controls, putting compensating controls in if you can't. It's good identity and access management, minimizing who's got access to what. If we're honest, none of us in the security industry want to do any of these really, really hard IT-like things, but general health and cleanliness of the environment means that people will not fall prey to this. And that, it isn't all black when you see that. The takeaways here are the same takeaways. Now, I was last defending a network in 2005, personally, when I worked at ST Micro. And it's the same takeaways now in 2021 as I was working off in 2005. It's all got a bit messier, but it's still the same stuff, So I don't find it too depressing. It's fun rather than depressing, actually. That's a different story.
Thanks for sharing all of that. I think that is so useful. And there's so much, like, people in the chat are saying how much they loved your presentation, like many of them, and you really got through to them, and you really, I think, helped expand those views to help them connect the dots, help them see so many other things, and help them see what their potential and hopefully real
no worries.
As well.
We have an amazing team in Romania, so people can reach out to those guys and girls. Yeah, take care. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Don. We hope to have you again at DefCamp, and we hope to meet you in person as well whenever we have the chance for that.